When Jake first met Lily, everything felt right. She was beautiful, funny, and just the right amount of mysterious. They met by chance, an accidental coffee spill at the campus cafe. Her laughter, as she apologized profusely, had stuck with him. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Jake never believed in fate until he met her. She moved into his life like she'd always belonged there, and it was easy to fall into a comfortable rhythm. But comfort, as he would soon learn, can be deceptive. The first odd moment came about a month into their relationship. One night, after a movie marathon at his place, Jake was startled awake by a strange sound. The clock read 2:43 a.m. He turned over and found Lily sitting up in bed, staring at the dark window. Her eyes were wide, glassy, unblinking. "Lily?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. She didn't respond. Her breath came slow and shallow. The air felt unnaturally cold. "Hey, you okay?" He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. She gasped sharply, and her head snapped around to face him. Her eyes looked different, darker somehow. Almost black. Then, just as suddenly, they softened, and she smiled sleepily. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I must have been sleepwalking." He brushed it off, though his stomach twisted with unease. They both went back to sleep, but the feeling lingered. Things grew stranger from there. Lily started to act different. Sometimes she was exactly the girl he'd fallen for, bright, witty, affectionate. But at other times, she seemed distant, hollow. Her eyes would glaze over, and she'd murmur things under her breath. Words that didn't sound like English. Words that didn't sound like words at all. One evening, while they were having dinner at her apartment, she excused herself to the bathroom. Jake's curiosity got the better of him, and he glanced around her living room. It was immaculately clean, almost obsessively so, except for one thing. On her coffee table lay an old, leather-bound book. Its cover was worn and cracked, and symbols he didn't recognize were etched into the spine. A chill ran through him as he thumbed through the brittle pages. The text was incomprehensible, filled with strange runes and diagrams. He didn't understand any of it, but the images, grotesque, shadowy figures, unsettled him. "What are you doing?" Lily's voice sliced through the air. Jake jumped, nearly dropping the book. "Nothing," he stammered, placing it back on the table. I was just looking." Her eyes bore into his, unblinking. "You shouldn't touch things that aren't yours," she said quietly. He swallowed hard. Something about her tone, flat and cold, made his skin crawl. "I'm sorry," he muttered. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine," she said. "Just don't do it again." That night, Jake stayed at her place, though he barely slept. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were plagued by dark shapes and whispering voices. He awoke suddenly, his heart pounding. The room was dark. He turned to look at Lily's side of the bed, but she wasn't there. A noise caught his attention. The bathroom door was ajar, a thin sliver of pale light leaking out. He could hear a low murmur coming from inside. "She's talking to herself again," he thought, his stomach twisting. Slowly, he slipped out of bed and padded to the door. He peered through the crack, and his blood ran cold. Lily was standing in front of the mirror, but her reflection wasn't right. Her lips were moving, forming words he couldn't hear. But in the mirror, her reflection's lips weren't moving at all. Instead, it was staring directly at him. The reflection's eyes were black voids, and its mouth slowly curled into a sinister smile. Jake stumbled backward, knocking into the door. Lily's head snapped around, her eyes wild. "What are you doing?" she hissed. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. Her expression softened, and she took a step toward him. "Jake, it's okay," she whispered. "You're just tired. Come back to bed." But he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, his eyes darting between her and the mirror. The reflection's smile widened. The next morning, Jake packed a bag and left. He told Lily he needed some space. She didn't argue. She just watched him with those dark, unreadable eyes and nodded. But he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching him, even when he was alone. He stopped answering her texts. He avoided her usual hangouts. He started sleeping with the lights on. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night he saw her reflection's face, those black eyes staring into his soul. Then, one night, he awoke to find his phone buzzing. A message from Lily. "I miss you. Please come back. I need you." Against his better judgment, he replied, "I can't. I'm sorry." Her response came immediately. "But I'm already here." His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he turned his head toward the darkened corner of his room. And there, in the shadows, two black eyes stared back at him, glinting with a terrible hunger. The police found his body the next morning. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but his eyes were wide open, frozen in terror. And his mirror, cracked right down the center, seemed to smile.